Hello, this is Paul, and this is a Course in Miracles video, and today's topic is there is no sin, and what if you looked within and you saw that there was no sin? So it's actually impossible for you to sin because nothing real can be threatened. So you literally are incapable of doing anything to anything real to make it be harmed or change or to have any real consequences. You cannot attack God. You cannot attack your brothers. You cannot be attacked. Separation from God is literally impossible. And so this idea of that you did sin is what makes it an illusion. So there's no such thing as you really sinning. There's only such a thing as you seeming to sin and pretending to sin and making up the idea that you've sinned and believing in it and trying to make it true, when in truth it is absolutely impossible. And sin is really a denial of the fact that you cannot sin. It is the idea that is of the impossible happening, that somehow you can do something to attack reality. You can change reality, or you can affect God, or you can defile heaven, or change what you are, or change what God created, or somehow turn away from your innocence and get into a state of sinfulness. It is impossible. In your perfect innocence, you cannot even conceive of real attack. It's an impossibility. And Jesus says, you cannot sin, but you can be mistaken. So in the Course, there is a distinction between a sin and an error, or something that seems to be really bad and wrong that you need to be punished for, versus you've just made a mistake and mistakes can be corrected. So in truth, it's not possible for you to sin. You have not achieved it. You haven't accomplished it. Even in your belief that you're stuck in a body and you must have separated because you don't seem to be experiencing God, it seems to prove that you have sinned, or that you're not aware of God, or you seem to be outside of heaven, or something that proves all these ways that you try to prove that the sin has occurred and it's had a real effect and it really has made something go wrong. It is an illusion. It's a lie. Now, let's say before the separation, underneath all of the lies and all of the beliefs in sin, there is a perfect reality. And in this perfect reality, God has created it, and it has many beings in it, angels and sons of God and the creations of the sons of God, all of them perfectly harmonious and equal to each other, and there's no specialness, there's no conflict, there's no war. Everyone is perfectly at peace and happy. And so you have a real self that is perfect. God created you in his image. You are a soul, therefore you are literally permanently as God created you. And the Course says that the soul does not ever leave the sight of God. It's incapable of entering into the illusion. It's incapable of becoming corrupt. It's incapable of sinning or dying or being sick. Spirit is in a state of grace forever. So your soul as spirit, another word for spirit, is permanently real and cannot be affected. It cannot change. You can't even change it. You have not changed. You cannot do anything to your real self, to your soul, to make it different, to make it go away, to punish it, to hurt it. It is absolutely divinely invulnerable forever. So, apologies if my throat's a little cloggy. I had some ice cream just now. So in reality, you cannot be sinned against, and you cannot sin, and you can't do anything wrong. Because you cannot change. You don't have the power to change what God created, and you don't have the power or the ability to affect God, or to affect yourself, or to affect your brothers. And God created many sons, many souls, and so each of them is perfect and holy and permanently perfect. Nothing can change them or affect them. And what Jesus says is that God also created many minds. Through the extension of his thought, he gave his mind to the minds that he created. And so each soul, each son of God, has their own mind. And it's only within the confines of that mind, like within my mind or within your mind, that there is any suggestion of ego, any idea of separation, any belief in sin or sickness happening or death. The soul is not having a problem. The soul cannot change, but the mind has the freedom of free will to be able to choose other things. So the mind is the place where the tiny mad idea occurs, and the mind is a mechanism of decision. And within the mind, within the scope of the mind, which is within the soul, that's where the dreaming and the illusion of separation happens. And it does not happen outside of that. So the separation does not affect your soul, because your soul is in a larger space than your mind is. Your mind, the content of your mind is inside the content of your soul. The mind doesn't go outside of itself. Ideas leave not their source. Therefore, the mind cannot do anything to the soul, because the soul is the outside container for the mind. So all of the dream of separation has only taken place inside of this box of the mind, and the soul has not entered into it. The soul has not changed. It has not become corrupt. It has not sinned. It has never been attacked. It is not in danger. It hasn't been threatened. Hasn't left the sight of God. It's real. So it's permanently in the state that it's in, meaning that that's yourself. Your soul is yourself. So that literally means that your soul cannot sin, cannot be hurt, cannot become sick, cannot die. Therefore, you are permanent. You are permanently safe. You're permanently real. You're permanently innocent. You're permanently guiltless and sinless, and free from sickness, and free from suffering of all kinds, and free from death. Nothing can touch you. Nothing can change you, because it's not God's will. God's will is that God is the expresser of his will to create you beyond time and space in a way that it's almost like he's constantly sustaining you, constantly broadcasting you. You've been fully created, and you are created forever. So yourself, your soul, is incapable of being affected by the separation, and it is not part of the separation idea. And this is also why the idea of God having many sons is not an ego concept. It's not an idea of ego separation, because the separation took place within the mind of the sons of God only, not in the souls and not in the container of the souls, which is the one Son of God. Those things, God's creation, is not capable of being hurt. It is not capable of dreaming or being affected or being unhappy or anything. So the entire sonship, all of the sons of God and the angels, all of the creations of the sons of God are all completely invulnerable from the separation idea. The separation idea was only within the minds of those individuals, not in their being, not in their self. And anything that you think is ego or sounds egotistical or reeks of separation or suggests or hints at there being divisions and things that are not supposed to be that way, that's not in the realm of the souls. It's not in the realm of the sons of God or the brotherhood or the sonship. It's only in the realm of the ideas that those beings are having in their minds, using their minds to dream. The mind doesn't take over the soul. The soul is the thing that uses the mind, and so it's using the mind to in a attempt to miscreate, and it's only within the mind that there can be an idea, and the tiny mad idea is in the mind, not in the soul. So all of God's children are permanently safe from the separation, and that's a good thing. So that means that your real self, you do have a real self, you have a soul that God created, and it's absolutely beyond the separation idea. It's beyond ego, it's beyond the illusion of death and sickness. It's permanently innocent and permanently divine and holy, and it literally is incapable of changing. So it's almost like a totally fixed rock that is just, it's permanently there, and it defies every single attempted attack and every force you could imagine and every possible way that you think you can change it, and it just remains exactly perfectly fixed forever in the mind of God, incapable of suffering in any way. It is absolutely invulnerable, and it cannot ever be affected. So you, that is your real self. So that means you are still as God created you, as a soul. Your real self cannot sin, has not sinned, and this mad idea that you've had is just a thought. It's only an idea in your mind. It hasn't really affected anything outside of that, and so you're just having this dream. And it seems as though within the dreaming that there seems to be evidence of you having actually sinned, or you've really produced a real consequence and made stuff happen, and it is not true. There literally is no such thing as real sin. A sin that can happen in reality, or a sin that can happen in heaven or in God's creation or to God's creation, it is perfectly safe forever. I'm just going to switch my air conditioning on for a second just to blow out some of this steam. That's better. So you cannot sin. That is the fact. You haven't. You have not sinned. So having this idea of a possible sin that has done something, and you feel guilty about it, and you need to be punished for it and suffer for it and die for it, is all based on a lie. Every sin is a lie. It's a disguise and an illusion designed to cover up the fact that you cannot sin or die, and that you literally have not offended God, you have not hurt God's feelings, you have not defiled reality, you have not broken heaven. It's literally not possible. So okay, so that means you cannot do what you think you've done. Just gonna wait for this car to leave so that it's not too loud. So, the idea of sin having really occurred is a mistake. So sin itself, the idea of sin, is actually a mistake. And mistakes can be corrected because they are only mistakes, and you haven't done anything that can't be corrected. You're not capable of doing anything that can't be healed, because whatever you think you've done is an illusion of being able to do something that you can't do. So if you think, okay, I've hurt someone, I've sinned, and I did something bad, and I'm a sinner, you are only mistaken. There is no sin. You have not sinned, and whatever you think that you did do, it was only a mistake, and it deserves forgiveness. So you don't deserve to be punished for something that isn't really a sin, that is only an illusion of a sin. It's a fake sin. There is no real sin. Every single sin, or every idea of having sinned, is always a lie, meaning that in truth, you're still innocent. And this is the atonement principle, that nothing's really happened, and the reason it hasn't happened is because it literally cannot happen. You cannot oppose God's will. You cannot have a real authority problem where you actually do go against God's will and offend him and hurt him, or do something that you shouldn't have done. Do you really think God would have created a being who is flawed, that is capable of doing the impossible? That God would have had to have built into you some kind of evil, some kind of maliciousness, to be able to conceive of a real sin and then accomplish it in a real way, in reality. God would have had to have created you a sinner in order for you to really sin, to be capable of really sinning in reality, and for it to have real effects. And God does not create sinners, because God is holy. God only creates the innocent, so you must be innocent. There's nothing that you can do. There's literally nothing you can do to sin. So you don't need to be worried about God's wrath. And this is the basis of the death wish, that the suggestion that you actually could sin and that you did was the idea that God was innocent and you attacked him against his will. You opposed his will and went against his will, and you caused him, and he's been the effect of you. Now that means you created God, and now you are God's father, and he's your child, and you've now hurt him and tried to destroy him and have changed him and have defined who he is in order to make him different against his will, causing him to be perfectly justified in being angry at you for having unfairly attacked him against his will. He now has every right to attack you back. And this is the basis of your belief that God now hates you, and in this hatred wants you dead. And because God is life, and you now perceive that life is against you and life doesn't want you and is now against your will, your only other option is to go off and die. Because you don't see that you can ever go back to life or go back to God or get forgiven, because you want to believe that you can sin and have sinned, and so you want to keep that sin idea. And so that produces the death wish, and it's the wish. It's hot today. So it's the wish and the belief that you want to believe in the sin and the ability to actually sin, and the only way you can do that is to believe that God wouldn't take you back, and that you really have hurt him, and that he's justified in hurting you back, and now God has wrath, and therefore your only option now is to go off by yourself in isolation and suffer and die, because life is no longer a choice, or no longer possible, or no longer an option. And so it makes it seem as though death is inevitable, because if you can't go back to life, you can't go back to God, what are you going to do? Your only choice is to go to death. And this is what forms the death wish, that every person with an ego has this death wish, where they literally believe that they should die and that they can only die because they don't have another option. So like the other option of being forgiven and resurrecting and coming to life has been taken off the table. And that's why people believe that they should die, and that's why they cause themselves to go through death, because they really believe that it's the only possibility. It's the only way, and the only way to be or to exist is to go towards death and not return to life, because you're so hopeless. You have no desire to be hopeful so that you can keep your sin. And if you would just realize that you do have the option B, option B says you can go back to God and be seen as forgiven, and be recognized as sinless, and be acknowledged as having never done anything to God, and be seen as perfectly innocent, and that whatever you thought you did, that you thought was such a bad sin, you didn't do it. You were not successful. You were just like some child that was playing a game of pretend and make-believe, trying to say, oh, I can hurt my parent, and I'm going to pretend that I really hurt them, all the while actually not being capable of it. And you have not done it. You have not hurt God. You have not offended reality. You did not sin, and you cannot sin. So in realizing that, it brings into question this death wish that maybe you don't have to die. Maybe even though the consequences of sin is death, or the wages of sin is death, if you haven't actually sinned, maybe you don't need to die. And if you haven't actually removed the option to be able to go back to God and be in life forever and have eternal life and remain alive and always be alive, if you don't seem to have that option, you're just going to think, I must die. And then you will die, because you're literally believing it's the only thing you can do, and it becomes a belief in fate. And Jesus says in the Course that death is a belief in fate. And in the early text version it says fate, and later on it was changed to hate, but it makes sense that you believe that death is a fate assigned to you, and it's inevitable if you believe that you've really sinned. So what you have to realize is that is not your only option. Death is not the only option, because you do have another option. Should have cooled off a sec. God wants you alive. He's not out to have you assassinated. He wants you alive. And when you are captured, he wants to tickle you and tell you how much he loves you. So the idea of death is the opposite of the idea of resurrection. So some people think that you can go ahead and die, or have the body die, and that's okay, and that that's normal or natural. And somehow you can be okay with death, and you can be at peace with death, and such, and so on. It is absolute bullshit. If you're going towards death, you're definitely not going towards life. You're going away from it, which means you're going away from God towards a state of not existing, which is totally against God's will, trying to bring about proof that you have sinned by committing self-punishment because God isn't going to punish you, so you have to punish yourself. So all death is self-inflicted, and that means a lot of people don't seem to recognize or realize that death is literally the opposite of life. It is the opposite of what it means to be close to God. And this is why resurrection is actually the place in which, or the state in which, you finish the curriculum of the Course. It literally says this in the Course. That this is where the curriculum ends, in the resurrection. And resurrection means the surmounting of life, and therefore it means the overcoming of death. So you cannot get to a state of life and a state of freedom from death forever by going closer to death and closer to sin and punishment and suffering if you do that, it's proving that you don't believe that life is an option. You don't think that you can be forgiven for your sin. You don't think forgiveness is justified, and instead you think that you deserve to be punished and that you should die because you believe yourself and want to believe that you really did sin and you pulled it off and you did it, and therefore you want to hold on to that really tight and prove it and go to your grave with it, to try to not let go of that bullshit. So the resurrection it means to bring back to life. It is the overcoming of death by, even if you were close to death, you return back toward life. Miracles fall like drops of healing rain on the dry and dusty world where the starved and thirsty creatures come to die, and all around the signs of life spring up, because that which was dry and dead is brought back to life. It is made to live again, even if it looked like it was decaying and dead and rotting in the ground. It returns to the living. It comes back to God. It gets closer to life and closer to God. So the aim of A Course in Miracles is not to go and fucking die. That's the most bullshit, the most extremely opposite to the Course belief that you can have is that the Course is wanting you to go through death. That it wants you to suffer and be punished and die and have to die and just carry on dying as if it's normal and natural, and it's what people do. It's what people do because everybody believes that they're a fucking sinner and that they really have sinned. They have a death wish, and they're trying to make themselves dead by making themselves not be themselves. It's totally the opposite of what Jesus wants for you, which is that you become so filled with life, so full of life, so alive that you can't even be sick, so freaking alive that even death can't touch you, so alive that you're out of reach of disease and suffering and death and every form of punishment that you think you had to have because you sinned. You're supposed to get to the resurrection. The resurrection, the overcoming of death, is the end of the curriculum. And it says this in the Course. Therefore, death is exactly the opposite of that. You're not supposed to go towards death. You're supposed to go towards life. Even in physicality, in the body, your body's gonna represent what's happening in your mind. If your mind believes that you sinned, and you believe that you don't have the option to go towards life, and that death has become inevitable, your mind will attack your body and make it dead, and you'll be against your own life, and being against your own life, you will consent to death and make it happen. If you don't want to go through that, you don't have to go through that. You're not supposed to go through that. It's not God's will. It's your attempt to oppose God's will and to hold on to sin and make it real and claim that you are supposed to die in order to pay for the sin that you've done, so that you can keep the belief in sin and not let it go. And that means that something's wrong with your mind. Your mind is believing that sin is real and that it's possible and that you've done it, which means you're not forgiving. So you cannot get to death with a forgiving attitude. If you're perfectly forgiving, death becomes impossible. So as you apply forgiveness, the purpose of applying forgiveness is to bring you back to life. It is to heal you. It is to undo damage and separation and symptoms of attack and self-inflicted suffering. The purpose of forgiving is to heal the mind so that the mind becomes more alive, and then the mind stops trying to kill the body and heals the body, because a sane mind heals the body. Those who are sick do not love themselves, for if they loved themselves, they would heal themselves. That's what the Course says, which means that there's no escape there. Either you're going to love yourself and heal yourself and heal the body and remove all sickness and every trace of death, or there's a trace of death, or you're going to go the other way and fail to forgive and end up condemning yourself and hurting yourself and causing suffering. So A Course in Miracles is a course in life. It is about resurrection. It's about raising the fucking dead, bringing things back to life that seem to have gone so far away from life and away from truth, and so far into opposing God's will that you don't believe that that's true and that it's possible, and therefore you don't take it seriously, you don't give it any credit, you don't make it real, you don't give it any power, and therefore you're able to return someone from the dead. This is part of being a miracle worker, that you can raise the dead. You can raise the dead because you are becoming miraculous as you get closer to the resurrection. As you're becoming more filled with life, and you're seeing that life is an option still, and you still can go back to God, and God can still love you and forgive you, you will become more alive, and the life that's in you will be able to give life to others and raise them from death in every possible way that you can imagine, including physically. And so this idea of sin is what it all hinges around. It's either you believe that sin is real, and if you do, the inevitable, automatic, logical conclusion that you will come to is that that means I must die, or you will mosquitoes, or you will not believe in sin and instead go towards God, and the inevitability of that decision is that I must live forever, because I'm choosing life. You're either choosing death in sin, or you're choosing that you don't believe in sin, you only believe that life is possible. Life is only possible because God is alive, and God only creates the living, and only the living is reality. You are alive as a son of God. You cannot die. That is the truth about you. So all this other stuff that you might believe about yourself, it's a lie. It cannot be the truth. So if you can get the feeling that in reality, all the beings of light that God created, all the souls who are perfect and holy at all times and can never sin, if you can get a sense of the permanence of that and the unchangeability of reality, and that whatever God creates is permanently innocent, there is kind of like a fixed world, a world of light, God's creation of heaven, which is permanently safe, permanently filled with joy, permanently celebrating, permanently alive. It's a living world. Nothing can ever go wrong there, and nobody ever gets sick, and nobody ever dies, and everybody lives forever, and everybody's very happy about that. So if you can get a sense of that, it means no matter how it looks in the world, no matter what's going on in your body, no matter what you're thinking, no matter how mistaken you are, you cannot change that fact. It is a fact that you have eternal life already. You're already innocent, you're already sinless, and you're already forgiven. So God's world cannot be changed. God's reality cannot be changed. You cannot change reality. You cannot do anything to make heaven be hurt or changed. So when you're seeing this world, which seems like a whole layer on top of that covers it up, including your body, which covers up your soul and is a device for trying to make it look as though people can see you, but it's actually a way to block them from seeing you. You're not seeing me when you see this body. God's kingdom is unassailable. God's kingdom cannot be sinned against. God's kingdom has not been sinned against. It is permanently safe and perfect forever. And therefore this stuff, this world, these illusions of sinning, these beliefs in having to be punished, the guilt, which is fake guilt, nobody's ever genuinely guilty, it's fucking fake. Fake fear, fake suffering, fake sickness, and fake death is all part of this illusion that is trying to paint a picture that is opposite to and not like the truth, and it is utterly false. So what you have to learn is that anything that says anything other than reality cannot be affected, nothing real can be threatened, you have not threatened reality, and you're still innocent, and you didn't sin, but you're just mistaken about the belief that you have sinned. It's just a mistaken perception, a mistaken belief that you've done something terribly wrong when you haven't, that you committed a terrible crime when you didn't, you couldn't have. You could not have committed the crime that you think you've committed against God. It is impossible. You cannot attack him. Which is cause for celebration. And I've lost my thought now because that was such a happy thought. All this other bullshit, all of the consequences of sin, it's all very logical. And Jesus talks about how the ego has impeccable logic, and so does the Holy Spirit. No matter whatever you start with as your premise, if you start with it's impossible to sin, the only logical conclusion from that is that therefore I must still be innocent and nothing's happened, and reality is still the same as it is, and I'm still as God created me. If you believe that sin is possible, it must also lead to a whole bunch of conclusions that are logical. If you have sinned, reality has been affected, therefore you must not be as God created you. That's logical. Therefore you are a sinner, and being a sinner you cannot go back towards life and be forgiven, therefore you must be punished instead of forgiven. So now punishment and guilt become inevitable, and then out of the guilt, because you know that you're a sinner and you will be punished and you must be punished, you will then become inevitably afraid, go into fear, and now you're in fear, now you're getting afraid of the punishment that you believe must come to you. Based on this line of logic, you think that you really must inevitably, logically, inescapably get punished, and now you become afraid of the punishment, and then the punishment starts showing up because you start attacking yourself because you believe that you're supposed to be punished. Secret to salvation, you're doing this to yourself, and then you punish yourself, and then you kill yourself. That's the logical conclusion that comes from the primary premise that I have really sinned, is that therefore you must die. That's what produces all death. That is how you consent to death. It's how you choose death. by believing that sin is possible. If you don't believe that you have sinned, and you don't believe that sin is possible and it's not real, and you recognize it as not true, you are not choosing death, and therefore you're choosing life, and therefore you will not kill yourself, and therefore death will not occur, because death doesn't happen for any other reason other than that you believe you deserve it. If you don't believe that you are entitled to death and that it's supposed to happen to you, or look like it's happening to you, but it really is you making it happen to yourself. If you don't believe in it, you don't believe in the sin, then that wasn't a sin, then there's no basis for death. There's no basis for the death wish, because if you haven't sinned and God hasn't been hurt and he still loves you, it is an option now to go back to God and be seen as forgiven, as having never sinned, and therefore you don't have to choose to die. You now have a choice. You now have something to choose between. You can either choose to go kill yourself, or you can choose to go life yourself, to resurrect, to choose life, to accept reality, to heaven is a choice I must make. Now that you see that you haven't sinned, you can recognize that you actually can now choose to accept the atonement, to accept that you didn't sin, you haven't sinned, you didn't do anything wrong, God still loves you, nothing's happened, doesn't matter what it looks like, you haven't done anything bad, you're not guilty, you don't deserve to suffer, you don't deserve to be punished, you don't deserve to be sick and dead, you only deserve love. The atonement says that you become fully willing to recognize that God's truth about you is the truth, and you're willing to accept it about yourself, meaning that you can accept, I do deserve to be loved by God because I literally haven't sinned, and I couldn't sin, and I haven't done it. I must still be the way that God created me, and I must therefore still be innocent, and therefore I do not deserve to suffer and die. I only deserve to live forever and to be free of suffering. And then you will be open to receiving love from God, which you hadn't been willing to do before. When you're in the sin belief, you won't let yourself be loved. You don't think that you deserve it, and you don't think it's an option, that you don't think love is possible anymore, because you've turned love into impossibility and tried to turn illusions into possibilities. So in the atonement, you become aware that you did not sin in reality. So if there's something in your life that you think you did, some event that seemed to occur in time where you did something, you did some action, and it seemed to cause something to happen, and somebody got hurt, or you did a crime, or committed some terrible thing, no matter what it is, however extreme it is, doesn't matter. If you believe that it actually did occur in reality, and you think this thing that you did, this sin, this mistake where you did something wrong, if you think it happened in time, in a body, with real consequences, and you know what the consequences were and what it caused, that holds sin in place, because now you're seeing sin as a causer, instead of recognizing that sin cannot cause anything, because sin does not cause God. Sin does not cause God to be changed or oppose his will. You cannot sin. So you've got to actually realize that whatever you think you did, it happened in a dream, seemed to happen in space-time, but it did not happen in reality. It didn't happen in heaven. It didn't happen to heaven. You didn't attack heaven. You were not capable of it. You don't have the ability to sin in reality. So whatever you think you've done, I'm just going to put the windows up a little bit here, I think. Getting a mosquito attack, illusion of one. Whatever you think you've done, it's better. You didn't do it in reality. You only did it in a dream. You only did it inside the illusion of the tiny mad idea, not outside of it in reality. You didn't do it in your soul. You didn't do it in heaven. You didn't do it anywhere real. You only did it in a fictional world where there are no real consequences and where you did not cause anything real to happen. You have not sinned in reality. And once you can realize that whatever you think you did in space-time, you did it inside of the context of a dream, you did not do it in reality, and you didn't do it to reality. This is not reality. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. If something's been threatened, it must be unreal. If something can be threatened in this world must be unreal. Nothing real can be threatened. So if this world is threatenable, if bodies can be attacked, they must not be real. So you cannot have done something to reality. So whatever it was in your past, when you think you did some terrible thing that you could never be forgiven for, it's not true because you didn't do it in reality. You only dreamed it. So God hasn't been affected. God hasn't been offended. God isn't upset with you. God is not going to enact his wrath to try to will against your will and make you dead. God does not will that you be dead. God does not want you to be suffering, and God does not will that you be unhappy. So all that God wants for you is to recognize that you're just having a bad dream. You're in a nightmare, and you're thinking that you did some horrific crime that you did not really do. And this isn't denial. There's a difference between you believing that you did it and then pretending that you didn't do it and trying to convince yourself that you didn't do it, even though you believe that you did. That is denial. That's worse. That's making it worse. You don't want to do that. But you do have to recognize that even the thing that you think you've done, it isn't real. It is unreality. You haven't actually done anything. You have to question the sin. You have to bring sin into question and ask yourself, is it really possible that I've actually done something in reality? Did this happen in reality? Has it really affected God? Has it really changed who I am? Has it converted my innocence into sin? Have I been changed out of my innocent state and turned into an evil monster? Is that even possible? No, it's not. And to just really question the fuck out of that idea that you actually did something, because even if it happened in time and space, even if you went and hurt your neighbor or whatever you did, you didn't. You did not do that. You cannot have done that. All you can have done is entertained an illusion and pretended to yourself and made a drama appear out of illusions, dreamed up a scenario, made up fake victims, caused illusions of suffering to happen to try to prove that you really could sin and did so, to cover up the fact that you cannot. So this idea that you've done something is itself denial. Sin is the denial of God. It is an attempt to deny that you cannot sin. It is the attempt to pretend that sin is possible. It's a denial of the truth. It's a denial of the fact that you are always innocent, and you can never become a sinner, and you can never ever offend God, and you can never hurt reality. Sin is literally a lie. It is a big fat lie. You haven't sinned and God still loves you. And this is what the atonement is about. It's about coming to realize and question. Oh, a bit too hot again. Coming to realize and question this idea that you're a sinner and that you've sinned, and that sin, your sin and other people's sins and sin in general, bringing it into question. Is it even possible to sin? It's not possible. Is it even possible that sin is real, that there's any sin anywhere? No, there is no sin anywhere. There is literally no sin anywhere. There are just mistaken people having delusions, believing that they've done stuff that is fake and not real and isn't true, and they haven't done it in reality. They're making up a fiction, and they're hallucinating lies and trying to believe that they really could sin against God, and they can't. They haven't. And you haven't. Whatever you've done, you didn't do it. Even if you remember doing it, that is not reality. Even if you remember having sinned, I don't know if I want to put that on, but maybe I will. Even if you can remember doing something terrible and awful, you have to get to the point where you question that, and your memory is only a memory of what your unconscious perception showed you. It is not a memory of reality. This is not reality. Your memory is not showing you what happened. It is showing you what you think happened in a dream. What you really need to remember is reality. You need to remember what has happened in reality, which is that God has created you incapable of sin, incapable of death, incapable of sickness. Remembering that would be much better than, and much more productive than, remembering that you're a sinner and that you deserve to suffer. And so this is what the atonement is about. The atonement is the same thing as the resurrection. It is tied to life, and you must become more alive in order to get closer to the resurrection, to get closer to God and closer to truth. You must approach life. You cannot be going toward death, because death is not life. This should be a clear distinction, but people don't see it. They keep blurring it together, and we've convinced ourselves that somehow death is actually something we want, deserve, should happen, must happen, will happen, and that it's salvation. That somehow death is going to save us from the wrath of God. If we can just punish ourselves, then we can assuage God's punishment and not get punished by God. We can sort of give ourselves a lesser punishment somehow and escape God's wrath by going into death. And what a stupid solution, because God doesn't even have a wrath. God does not have the ability to do anything other than love you. These mosquitoes are not God, because they're trying to suck my blood. So, accepting the atonement requires you to reject death. It requires you to overcome death. It requires you not to believe in death, and it requires you not to demonstrate death, and it requires you to not have a dead body. A resurrected body is not a dead body. So if you're going to get to the resurrection, it's going to cause your body to be healed as well. And eventually it's going to make your body disappear completely, because it's going to heal it away completely. A lot of mozzies. Mosquitoes love me. They've always loved me. Mosquitoes love to kiss me with their little kisses. So in the atonement, you're accepting that sin is not possible and you haven't sinned. It's the recognition, the awareness that it's true. And you can only get into that awareness when you stop believing otherwise. You must let go of the belief in sin and guilt and fear and sickness and death. It all has to go. You have to not believe in it. Otherwise, you cannot believe the atonement. You won't be willing. You'll be like, well, I kind of believe it, but I kind of don't, and I kind of have some doubts, and you'll be pulled away from it by this conviction of other things that you believe in that are contrary to it. You have to let go of all belief in suffering and death and punishment and fear and guilt and sin first, and then you will be free to choose otherwise, and you'll be you'll be willing to choose otherwise. But you won't be willing if you believe in the ego. You will not believe God. You will not believe the Holy Spirit. You have to undo all the belief that you have ever sinned and that you're ever capable of sinning. It has to go. It is a lie. You're lying to yourself if you believe that you've sinned. And so when you do that, you can finally accept, I can see that it makes sense and it's true that this sin that I thought I didn't do it. It didn't happen in reality. It's had no real consequences and no effects on God. Nothing has changed. I'm still as God created me, and therefore I'm still worthy because I'm still innocent. My innocence hasn't changed. The sin did not change my innocence because the sin didn't happen, and therefore I'm still innocent, and so I deserve to be loved by God, and God is loving me. And then you will be willing to let yourself be loved, and that allowing of love is a receiving of miracles. You are receiving love, and love is a miracle. So in the atonement, you receive love from God. I'm going to have to wrap up soon. I'm getting too many mosquito bites here. They're getting hungry, like I am. So in the atonement, you accept that you're still innocent, and so God loves you. And in that love, you allow that love, you receive the love, you finally acknowledge it, and you're relieved. You're tremendously relieved that God did not condemn you and did not hate you and isn't angry at you and still loves you. It is a profound relief, and you'll be so overjoyed and so happy. You'll have tears of joy in recognizing the truth that God has not turned you away. He has not abandoned you. He still loves you. He sees you as perfectly forgiven. He does not hold anything against you, and he never did. He didn't even believe that you were even capable of doing anything wrong, and knows that you haven't. So his love for you is full and unconditional. And then you become willing to let yourself receive it, to let it be true of you, that you are love, that you're right up there in that lofty place with God in a state of lovability and perfect innocence. and therefore everything's groovy. And then you can laugh, and then you can be happy, and then you can be relieved, and then you forget about your stupid dreams of death, and just be filled with God's love and allowing God's love to come through you and extending. And now you become part of the atonement plan, because now you are in a position where you are willing to recognize that you deserve to be loved because you haven't sinned. Therefore, that applies to everyone. Therefore, you're willing to recognize that everyone else who seems to believe that they sinned also cannot have sinned. So they must also deserve love. They're also worthy of love, the same love that you deserve. And so now you become willing to share that love with them and extend it to them, and now you become a miracle worker, because now you've received the power of God and you've allowed yourself to be connected to God again and to let yourself receive love, and now you're willing to extend it and share it and allow it to be through you. Now you're going to be working miracles, and you're going to be raising the dead, because now you are now you're free. Now it is the privilege of the forgiven to forgive, is what that means, is that you've gone to the atonement and accepted forgiveness, that nothing happened and you're innocent, and now you're able to give that to others, and you're supposed to, because you do have brothers and they're real, and so you're supposed to become part of the plan directed by Jesus to now go out and heal the sick and raise the dead, to prove and demonstrate that only life is real and no one deserves to suffer or die. That's how we become part of the way in which the atonement of others is brought to them, and we help to implement the atonement for the sonship. And it's all based on there being no sin. Once you recognize that you didn't sin, because it's literally impossible, and any belief that you have to the contrary must be mistaken, then you now will be willing to admit that what's true of you is true of your brother, and so if you deserve love, so do they. If you're not a sinner, they're not a sinner either. If your sickness isn't real, their sickness isn't real. If you don't deserve to be punished, nor do they. If you're not guilty, they're not guilty. If you have no reason to be afraid, they should have no reason to be afraid either. And therefore you can now give a blessing of healing to them, for them. Just as Jesus says miracles are intercessions and they intercede for your holiness, you can intercede for other people and heal them miraculously, even if they don't seem to believe that they deserve it. You can shine your light into their mind and give them what they seem to be lacking. Miracles supply a lack. And it's your role and your function to be a healer in the world, because that's the Holy Spirit's role in the world, and you're supposed to share it with him and heal yourself and others. I will heal as I let him teach me to heal. It's double-sided, that I will be healed and others will be healed as I allow him to teach me how to do that, how to accept it for myself and give it to others by extension, because it cannot be true for me unless it's true for others also. So when you become forgiven and you become healed, you are now able to give forgiveness, and you're able to forgive the sins of others and heal them and resurrect them, and cancel out the consequences of the fake sin that they think they've done. You have that power. So there is no sin. The Son of God is free. There is no death. The Son of God is free. Nobody needs to be dying. Nobody's supposed to be suffering. Only life is real. Only love is real. There is no real sin. There is no real death. You cannot sin and you cannot die. You are immortal spirit, and you always will be, and you always have been. You're just pretending not to be, and in your pretending, you are mistaken, and that mistake is not a sin. It's just a mistake. It's a belief that something's true that isn't, so you're mistaken about it. You're not actually doing something wrong, and that sin can be healed, and it can be corrected, and it will be corrected if you're willing. Holy Spirit will undo the consequences of my wrong decision, my mistaken choice, if I will let him, and I choose to let him by allowing him to choose atonement for me. So I'm going to stop there because I need to go and not be where the mosquitoes are. And forgive them for their little sin of trying to eat me alive and cause death. I am invulnerable. Enough. So till next time, you haven't sinned. You're lovable. You're safe. You cannot be threatened because you're real. Nothing real can be threatened, and you have not sinned, and you never will, so lighten the fuck up. Accept your holiness and your innocence. God still loves you, and God bless, and good night.